Story lovers, you arrived at Luxury Tales, where hidden empires collide with forbidden love, and destiny strikes without warning. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because tonight's story is raw, unpredictable, and drenched in secrets money can't hide. Now sit back. Luxury Tales unfolds. Ruth Bernard was a kind of woman whose presence felt like quiet rain, gentle, steady, and nourishing, yet often unnoticed by those too busy chasing storms. She grew up learning the language of responsibility early, not because she was forced, but because life had whispered it into her bones. Her world valued patience over noise, consistency over display. Ruth believed that love was not a feeling you performed, but a discipline you practiced daily. She believed marriages were built the way houses were built, brick by brick, even when the weather was unkind. Her dreams were modest but firm. A peaceful home, a faithful partner, children raised with warmth and structure, and a life that made sense even when it was not easy. She worked diligently, saved carefully, and trusted deeply, perhaps too deeply. Ruth's personality was shaped by empathy. She listened more than she spoke, observed more than she demanded, and forgave more than she confronted. She found joy in routines, morning tea, neatly folded laundry, handwritten grocery lists. She loved reading, not to escape reality, but to understand people better. She volunteered occasionally, not for recognition, but because helping others grounded her. Ruth was not naive. She simply believed that people, if loved well enough, could become better versions of themselves. That belief would later be tested in ways she could never have imagined. By the time Ruth met Wilfred Collins, she was ready to commit her life to something lasting. She wasn't searching for perfection. She was searching for sincerity. She didn't know then that loving a man who secretly despised his own reflection would cost her far more than she was prepared to lose. At that moment, she only knew she was willing to build, to endure, and to believe, because that was who she had always been. Wilfred Collins carried ambition like a second spine, rigid, heavy, and painful to ignore. From the outside, he looked driven and confident, but beneath that surface lived a constant terror of insignificance. Wilfred did not fear poverty as much as he feared invisibility. He wanted admiration, status, and proof that he was more than where he started. Every decision he made was filtered through one silent question. Will this make people respect me? Love, to Wilfred, was valuable only if it reflected well on him. He worked tirelessly, spoke boldly, and projected certainty, yet his confidence cracked easily when challenged. Wilfred compared himself constantly, colleagues, acquaintances, strangers he saw only once. If someone else succeeded faster, it gnawed at him. If someone admired him less, it enraged him. He measured success externally and treated marriage not as a partnership, but as an accessory to his image. His hobbies revolved around appearances, networking events, expensive tastes he could barely afford, conversations designed to impress rather than connect. Wilfred wanted to be seen as powerful, even when he felt powerless inside. When Wilfred met Ruth, he saw her steadiness as a refuge. She admired his drive, encouraged his goals, and never competed with him. To Wilfred, that felt like peace at first. What he didn't recognize was that peace eventually felt like stagnation to a man addicted to validation. Ruth's quiet support did not feed his ego loudly enough. Her loyalty did not elevate his status visibly. Slowly, without admitting it, Wilfred began to resent the very woman who believed in him before anyone else did. Their meeting was unremarkable by dramatic standards, which made it meaningful. No spectacle, no grand gestures. Just two people crossing paths during an ordinary moment and choosing to stay present. Ruth admired Wilfred's ambition and interpreted his intensity as passion. Wilfred admired Ruth's calm and mistook her emotional depth for unconditional acceptance. They talked about goals, values, and the future with hopeful seriousness. Their early relationship felt balanced because Ruth carried emotional labor effortlessly, masking Wilfred's growing dependence on her reassurance. They fell in love through proximity and persistence. Long conversations, shared meals, plans whispered instead of shouted. Wilfred felt supported. Ruth felt chosen. He proposed when his career began to show promise, and she accepted without hesitation. To Ruth, marriage was not a reward. It was a commitment. To Wilfred, it was proof he was progressing. Their wedding was modest but meaningful, and Ruth believed deeply that love would mature as life unfolded. What neither of them saw clearly was imbalance forming beneath the surface. Ruth loved Wilfred for who he was. Wilfred loved Ruth for how she made him feel. It was a subtle difference, almost invisible at first, but it would eventually become the fault line that split everything apart. For now, they stood at the beginning, hopeful, committed, and unaware that the seeds of future devastation had already been planted. Marriage did not change Ruth Bernard overnight, but it changed Wilfred Collins in subtle, accumulating ways. At first, their home felt like a shared project. Ruth organized their space with care, turning small apartments into places of warmth. She cooked meals that stretched limited finances, managed household details without complaint, and structured her days around support rather than self-interest. Wilfred appreciated these efforts, but only as long as they aligned with his sense of momentum. When his career began to demand more of his time and attention, Ruth's quiet stability became background noise rather than a gift. Wilfred started to speak more about what they lacked than what they had. Conversations drifted toward comparisons, other couples, other lifestyles, other successes. Ruth listened patiently, believing that seasons of frustration were normal. She reassured him, reminding him that growth took time and that they were building together. What she didn't realize was that Wilfred had already begun to mentally separate his ambition from their marriage. He saw her support as expected rather than exceptional. Slowly, he began to treat her presence as permanent and her feelings as flexible. The imbalance showed in small decisions. Wilfred made plans without consulting Ruth, justified absences without apology, and measured his progress by external applause rather than shared peace. Ruth noticed a shift but chose understanding over confrontation. She believed marriage required endurance, not constant negotiation. She had no idea that by absorbing every strain quietly, she was allowing a narrative to form, one where Wilfred felt entitled to more and Ruth felt obligated to endure less. Elena Richard entered Wilfred's world like a mirror polished to reflect only his best angles. She was observant, adaptive, and dangerously intuitive. Elena had survived by reading people quickly and becoming what they wanted to see. She never attached herself emotionally. Attachment made people careless. Her interest in Wilfred was calculated from the start. Not love, not desire, but opportunity. She noticed his hunger before he spoke it aloud. Their interactions began casually. Professional overlaps, social settings where Elena made herself visible but not available. She laughed at Wilfred's stories, praised his ambition, and validated frustrations Ruth never even knew he voiced. Elena listened with strategic attention, storing details like currency. She never criticized Ruth directly. Instead, she framed Wilfred as misunderstood, underappreciated, and destined for more. She positioned herself as the one person who saw him. Wilfred felt energized around Elena. With her, he didn't feel responsible, he felt admired. She never asked for effort, only attention. Elena made admiration feel effortless and intoxicating. What Wilfred didn't know was that Elena had perfected this dynamic many times before. She never stayed long enough to be exposed, never invested enough to be hurt. Wilfred was not special. He was simply useful. And Elena was patient enough to wait until he believed the lies she whispered were his own thoughts. Ruth sensed change before she could name it. Wilfred's absence was not just physical. It was emotional, deliberate, selective. He grew distracted during conversations, impatient with questions, defensive when asked about his schedule. Ruth tried to adapt, tried to be lighter, quieter, more accommodating. She believed love required flexibility. She did not know she was slowly being erased from her own marriage. Money became a source of tension. Wilfred's spending increased without explanation, and joint plans were postponed indefinitely. Ruth managed her home more carefully, compensating without complaint. She stopped sharing her worries, sensing Wilfred's irritation when life felt inconvenient. Instead, she internalized stress, convincing herself that marriage meant carrying weight silently when necessary. Elena's influence intensified. Wilfred began to speak differently, less warmth, more authority. He questioned Ruth's choices, dismissed her opinions, reframed her concern as control. Ruth felt confused but blamed herself. She wondered if she had failed to grow alongside him, unaware that Wilfred's growth had been guided by deception. The house grew quieter, colder. Ruth still believed in love, but she no longer recognized the man she was loving. Ruth discovered her pregnancy on a morning that should have been joyous. She held the test in trembling hands, heart racing with hope. She imagined Wilfred's smile, imagined renewed closeness, imagined unity restored. To her, a child was not a burden but a promise, a living reminder of commitment. She waited carefully, choosing the right moment to tell him. Wilfred's reaction was not what she expected. He masked shock with silence, followed by forced composure. He did not celebrate. He calculated. A child meant responsibility, stability, permanence. Everything Elena had subtly framed as limitation. Wilfred congratulated Ruth politely, but his distance deepened. What Ruth saw as a bond, Wilfred saw as pressure. Ruth's pregnancy was marked by emotional isolation. She attended appointments alone, navigated physical exhaustion quietly, and adjusted her life around an absent partner. She told herself Wilfred needed time. She refused to imagine rejection. Meanwhile, Elena amplified Wilfred's fear, suggesting subtly that his life was being decided for him. Wilfred listened, and with each passing day, he moved further from the family Ruth was carrying. Wilfred stopped arguing. That was the most frightening change. When Ruth attempted discussions, he responded with cold logic instead of emotion. He spoke of incompatibility, timing, pressure. He framed their marriage as misaligned rather than broken by betrayal. Ruth felt blindsided. She had endured so much believing patience would heal everything. Legal documents appeared suddenly. Wilfred presented separation as a rational solution, avoiding emotional accountability. Ruth was stunned, trying to reconcile his words with the life they had built. She begged for conversation, not reconciliation, just understanding. Wilfred refused vulnerability. Elena had taught him that emotion weakened control. Ruth signed papers through tears, not because she agreed, but because she was exhausted. She was pregnant, emotionally drained, and fighting alone. Wilfred promised support, but offered no warmth. That night, the house felt unfamiliar. Walls that once held dreams now echoed with finality. The confrontation escalated unexpectedly. Wilfred accused Ruth of trapping him, of slowing him down, of demanding too much by simply existing. Words sharpened. Ruth pleaded for dignity, reminding him of their vows, their child. Wilfred's anger erupted, not loud but cruel. He demanded she leave. Immediately, it was near midnight. Rain had begun to fall. Ruth stood frozen, clutching her coat, her body heavy with pregnancy and disbelief. She had nowhere prepared to go. Wilfred didn't care. He handed her a bag and opened the door. No discussion. No mercy. The marriage ended not with closure, but expulsion. As Ruth stepped into the storm, the door closed behind her. The sound echoed louder than the thunder above. She stood there for a moment, rain soaking through her clothes, realization crashing into her chest. She was alone, pregnant, discarded. Ruth walked until her strength failed. Rain drenched her hair, chilled her skin, blurred her vision. She clutched her stomach instinctively, whispering reassurances to the child she refused to let despair touch. Her body shook uncontrollably as she collapsed beneath a dim streetlight. A car slowed, then stopped. Clement Patrick stepped out, immediately noticing her condition. He was composed, concerned, composed, and instinctively protective. He offered his coat, his voice calm, his questions gentle. Ruth could barely speak. She was shivering violently. Clement did not ask for explanations. He helped her into the car, turned up the heat, and drove her somewhere safe. That night, everything shifted, not because Ruth was rescued, but because for the first time in months, someone saw her pain without judging it. And without knowing it, Clement Patrick had just stepped into a story that would change all their lives forever. Clement Patrick did not take Ruth to a hospital first, not because he dismissed a condition, but because he understood shock. He drove her to a quiet, well-guarded residence that felt lived in rather than imposing. The lights were warm, the air dry, the silence intentional. He wrapped her in a blanket before asking her name. Ruth answered in fragments, embarrassed by how small her voice sounded. Clement listened without interruption, his presence steady, unhurried, and free of curiosity that demanded explanation. He offered tea, then space, then assurance, never all at once, never overwhelming. Ruth slept for hours in a guest room that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. When she woke, the rain had stopped. Morning light filtered through curtains, gentle and forgiving. Clement had left a note. Rest. You're safe. The simplicity of it broke her. No conditions. No expectations. No judgment. She cried quietly, not from pain this time, but from relief. For the first time since her marriage began to unravel, she felt protected without being possessed. Clement returned later with groceries and a doctor's contact information placed respectfully on the table, not pushed into her hands. He explained nothing about himself beyond what was necessary. Ruth noticed the discipline in his movements, the order in his home, the way he avoided imposing decisions on her. That restraint told her more than any explanation could. This was a man who understood power and chose not to wield it carelessly. Ruth insisted on contributing, even while recovering. She organized small tasks for herself, folding laundry, tidying shared spaces, because reclaiming usefulness helped steady her mind. Clement noticed, but never commented. Instead, he adjusted quietly, ensuring she never strained herself. They spoke during meals, exchanging neutral stories at first. Ruth shared her love for structure, for planning, for building things carefully. Clement spoke of governance, responsibility, and the loneliness of leadership without spectacle. Clement Patrick was not a man untouched by hardship. His life had been shaped by public scrutiny, long hours, and sacrifices invisible to most. He had learned that authority isolated as much as it empowered. He had known relationships that admired his title rather than his character, and he had withdrawn rather than compromise his integrity. Ruth sensed this not from confession, but from the way he listened. He listened like someone who knew what it meant to be misunderstood. Ruth's pregnancy progressed quietly. Medical appointments were arranged without fanfare. Clement accompanied her once, then stepped back when she preferred privacy. He respected boundaries instinctively. That respect became the foundation of trust. Ruth began to sleep without fear, to eat without nausea, to breathe without bracing for impact. The house no longer felt temporary. It felt like a pause, a deliberate one, where healing was allowed to begin. Strength returned to Ruth slowly, but meaning returned faster. She began journaling again, mapping emotions she had suppressed for too long. She realized how much of her marriage had been spent shrinking herself to preserve peace. Clement never asked about Wilfred. Ruth volunteered pieces only when ready. Each time she spoke, Clement responded with clarity, not sympathy that weakened her resolve, but understanding that sharpened it. Ruth took long walks on the property, grounding herself in routine. She reconnected with her values, self-respect, patience, purpose. She did not rush forgiveness or closure. She focused on stability for her child, planning with precision. Clement supported those plans materially, but never emotionally claimed them. He reminded her gently that independence mattered. Ruth began to feel like herself again, not a wife abandoned, but a woman becoming. Their conversations deepened organically. They discussed leadership, accountability, and the difference between power and control. Clement admitted that governance had taught him humility, that serving others required restraint. Ruth shared her belief that love should feel safe, not earned through endurance. In those exchanges, something rare formed, mutual recognition. Not attraction yet, recognition. Two people seeing each other clearly, without agenda. Public life pressing again. Clement returned to official duties more frequently, though he remained present. Ruth watched from a distance, learning how responsibility weighed on him. She saw the discipline required to remain ethical under pressure, the quiet decisions that protected others at personal cost. It changed how she understood strength. Wilfred had equated strength with dominance. Clement embodied it through restraint. Ruth began working remotely, using her organizational skills to consult discreetly. Clement encouraged her to build autonomy, offering resources without ownership. She accepted help without guilt the first time. Her confidence grew. Her posture changed. The woman who had been thrown into rain now stood rooted in purpose. Meanwhile, rumors reached Clement about Wilfred, about Elena, about financial inconsistencies and manipulation unraveling. He did not share this with Ruth immediately. He believed healing required focus forward, not backward. When he did speak, he was careful, factual, and respectful of her emotional readiness. Ruth listened calmly. Closure, she realized, didn't require confrontation. It required truth, and she finally had it. The shift between Ruth and Clement was subtle but undeniable. Trust had matured into affection into quiet longing. Clement addressed it first, not with assumption, but with consent. He told Ruth he admired her resilience, her clarity, her integrity. He said he would never step into her life as a replacement or rescuer, only as a partner, if she ever chose. Ruth took time. She examined her feelings carefully, honoring her process. She recognized that what drew her to Clement was not safety alone, but equality. He did not fill a void. He met her where she stood. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. She acknowledged the connection, the possibility, the hope, without surrendering herself. They agreed to move slowly, intentionally. No labels, no pressure, just presence. That decision, mutual, patient, deliberate, marked a true turning point. Ruth was no longer surviving. She was choosing. And Clement was no longer just a man who found her in the storm. He was becoming a man who walked beside her into something new. Wilfred Collins did not fall all at once. His collapse was gradual, humiliating, and unavoidable. The same confidence that once insulated him now betrayed him. Financial discrepancies surfaced first, accounts drained, contracts altered, signatures forged. Elena Richard vanished without warning, leaving behind nothing but paper trails and unanswered questions. The admiration Wilfred had mistaken for love dissolved into exposure. Colleagues withdrew. Partners distanced themselves. His name became associated with recklessness rather than ambition. Wilfred tried to explain, to justify, to salvage what remained of his reputation. But explanations sounded hollow when trust had evaporated. The realization arrived painfully. Elena had never loved him. She had studied him, exploited his hunger, and exited the moment his usefulness expired. The bitterness of that truth settled heavily. For the first time, Wilfred faced a mirror without illusion, and in that reflection, he saw not a victim, but a man who betrayed loyalty for validation. Ruth heard of Wilfred's unraveling through secondary channels. When Clement told her, she listened calmly, without triumph or bitterness. The man who had expelled her at midnight no longer held power over her emotions. His downfall did not restore what was lost, but affirmed what she had learned. Integrity outlives deception. She closed that chapter internally, not with forgiveness spoken aloud, but with peace reclaimed. Clement Patrick did not rush what came next. He believed that love, like leadership, required patience and clarity. When he spoke of the future, he framed it not as rescue or reward, but as partnership. He acknowledged Ruth's autonomy, her strength, and her right to choose freely, even if that choice did not include him. That honesty deepened what already existed between them. Ruth considered her life carefully. She assessed not just her feelings, but her stability, her identity, and the example she wanted to set for her child. She was no longer the woman who clung to marriage out of fear of failure. She had rebuilt herself deliberately. And now, when she chose Clement, it was not from need, it was from alignment. Their decision was quiet, intentional, and mutual. They informed only those who needed to know. There was no spectacle, no announcement, just a shared understanding that what they were building deserved privacy and respect. Ruth felt no urgency, no anxiety. Love no longer felt like something she had to endure. It felt like something she was allowed to enjoy. Ruth stepped fully into her new identity with confidence. She balanced motherhood preparation with meaningful work, maintaining independence while embracing support. Clement never overshadowed her. He stood beside her. Their home became a place of intention, structured, calm, and warm. Ruth's pregnancy progressed healthily, marked by laughter, planning, and restored hope. Public life intersected with private life carefully. Clement remained disciplined, ensuring boundaries were respected. Ruth admired his consistency, the same man in public and private, the same principles regardless of audience. That consistency healed something deep within her. She realized trust was not built through promises, but through patterns. As her due date approached, Ruth reflected on how far she had come. The memory of the storm, the streetlight, the cold, it no longer haunted her. It reminded her of resilience. Pain had not destroyed her. It had refined her. She was no longer defined by rejection, but by choice. Clement proposed without grandeur. No crowd, no pressure, just truth. He spoke of respect, patience, and shared purpose. He spoke of partnership, not ownership. He acknowledged her past without reopening wounds. He promised presence, not perfection. Ruth accepted without hesitation, not because she needed security, but because she recognized equality. She recognized a love that did not demand silence or sacrifice of self. Her yes was calm, assured, and complete. They planned a future that honored both of them. Ruth maintained her name, her work, her independence. Clement supported her visibly and privately. Their bond was not fueled by recovery from trauma, but by alignment of values. The foundation was solid because it had been built slowly. Ruth held her child for the first time with clarity and gratitude. Life had not unfolded as she once imagined, but it had unfolded truthfully. She had lost a marriage that demanded endurance and gained a life that respected her wholeness. Clement stood beside her, not as a savior, but as a partner who had arrived when she was ready to be seen. Wilfred Collins faded into irrelevance, not because he was punished, but because Ruth no longer carried him forward. Elena Richard disappeared entirely, leaving behind only lessons and consequences. The storm that once defined Ruth's lowest moment now marked the turning point of her highest growth. The story did not end with revenge or spectacle. It ended with dignity, with peace, with a woman who survived betrayal, reclaimed her identity, and chose love again on her own terms. And that was the greatest change of all. I'm glad you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to follow, share, and comment your thought about the story. See you in the next story.